Welcome to The Healthy Advisor, a podcast from WealthManagement.com focused on advisors' personal well-being and healing. I'm Diana Britton, managing editor of WealthManagement.com, and in this podcast we explore some of the struggles and personal development issues facing advisors and financial services professionals, and how to get to a place of healing for mind, body, and spirit. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Healthy Advisor podcast, and thanks for joining us. As you may know, this is the podcast focused on financial advisor health and well-being, and today's guest is going to be really helpful on this topic. His name is Drew Shockley. He's the co-founder of Move Health, a software platform for advisors that helps them accurately predict the cost of health insurance for clients in a pre-retirement window. Really important topic and company that he's started. Drew, thank you so much for being here.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me today.
So I know, we're going to talk a little bit about Move Health. It's, not the main topic of the conversation today, but a little bit about Drew's personal journey. He grew up on a dairy farm in Tennessee, started working in the insurance space, making $7.50 an hour, and by his 30s had built and sold multiple companies, including an 8-figure exit in 2020. And from the outside, it sounds like a dream, but that's kind of just the highlight reel, right? The road to Drew's success was not a straight path. Like any startup or entrepreneur, along the way, he experienced burnout and struggled with the pressure of leading a much larger team. And now he's kind of rebuilding something that's more aligned with his values. But the personal lessons really stuck with him, and we're going to talk about these lessons today. I think that they are really very relevant to financial advisors and financial professionals. Although Drew is not a financial advisor, I think that, these lessons are really for any leader running a business. But Drew, let's go back. Tell me about your childhood, and what was it like growing up on a dairy farm in Tennessee?
Well, thank you for that question. And I always love talking about my childhood because it was actually really good. I really enjoyed growing up in East Tennessee. I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee, or just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. Actually, if you want to be technical, Strawberry Plains, Tennessee is it. And my grandfather was a third-generation dairy farmer, which if you didn't grow up with a grandfather who was a dairy farmer, I'm sorry, because I had an absolute blast. For me as a kid, I was jumping up in the truck, riding tractors, feeding cows, taking care of calves, and just learning how to work and how to take care of responsibilities and how to do things. Because when you're a dairy farmer, there are no days off. Cows don't go on PTO. There are no holidays. So, it's twice a day, every day. And, it's tough work. So, dairy farmers do some amazing things, and, people don't see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have some family that have farms in Alabama. I'm not dairy farms, but, growing other stuff. But yeah, it's hard work. I wish my kids could get exposure to the hard work like that. But so how did you get into the health insurance business? What was kind of the journey from the dairy farm into insurance?
Well, I'm not sure, Diana, that really anyone growing up, says, I want to be an insurance agent when I get older, right? Like we typically say things like, hey, we want to be a professional athlete, or we want to be a teacher, or we want to, be a superhero, or whatever it is. I don't know of any kids running around. My boys are certainly not running around saying that they want to be an insurance agent when they grow up. So I think most people get into insurance or get into, various professional careers just kind of by chance. So my story's kind of interesting. I grew up in Tennessee. I went off to college in Indiana, and that's where I met my to be wife when we got engaged. My father-in-law, who to be father-in-law at the time, was an attorney down in Missouri. And one of the
Mm.
first things he said to me after we got engaged, he said, Drew, he said, now that you're and my daughter is going to marry you, one of the most important things is that you need to purchase health insurance. And he said, I'm assuming that you've already started working on that. And I shook my head, up and down, yes,
Yeah.
like I was, but I truly knew nothing about health insurance, and I didn't know anything about being an adult and taking care of things. So that sent me on a journey to start researching health insurance and trying to figure things out. And I ended up in the Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield office in Evansville, Indiana, and met a guy there that was mid to late 30s, dressed really nice, had on a nice watch, and seemingly had success. And I was like, okay, this seems like maybe a good job, but I needed to take care of my health insurance in the first place. And so after he asked the question when we got our health insurance in place. He goes, "Hey, so you all you're getting ready to get married, and what are you going to do with your life?" And he kind of looked at my wife, and she spoke up first. And at the time, she was studying marketing, and she said, "Well, I think I'm going to work in marketing for
Mm.
a company." She had her life all figured out, right? And then he looked at me, and I said very jokingly, I think that I'm going to have a long career in the health insurance industry. And, just kind of said it straight faced. And then he said, well, really? Are you like studying it? Are you doing an internship? Are you doing whatever? And I was like, actually, I'm just kidding. I have no idea what I'm going to do. And so it was, after a short conversation after that, he offered me a job to be
Hmm.
his sales assistant. And as you mentioned early on, $7.50 was my starting wage. This was back in 2005, so it was almost 20 years ago. And I was thrilled because, Diana, before that, I was actually working at the golf course, raking bunkers for $7 an hour. So it was a big upgrade for me. So I was happy.
Yeah, that's a great story. I mean, it's almost prophetic in a way. I know you were telling me that, growing up, you didn't, have a whole lot of, personality assessments and really thinking about matching your skill set to what you wanted to do in life. But you really developed a passion for that over the years. And so what do you think drove that passion?
It's a really good question. I think when we were talking before we started the segment here, I think what I really mean by that and is today I don't think back then people were really talking to me about what I should do professionally. I don't
Mm,
think really anybody was saying, "Hey, you would be good at this," or "Hey, you would be good at that." So, I don't know, as a 18, 19, 20-year old, here and, growing up in America, you don't really think about, okay, my personality and my skill sets would be really good for this. I don't
mm,
know how it's working today. I have a 15 and a 13-year-old boy. I'm trying to help them understand what they would be good at. But when I was growing up, that wasn't any part of conversation that I was having. So looking back now, I kind of see, hey, my granddad, who I spent a ton of time with, he was really good with people. He was the dairy farmer that I mentioned earlier. He was really good with people. And what I mean by that is he would talk to everyone. We would, see somebody out at the gas station or whatever. And, it didn't matter whether they were driving a really nice car, maybe a Mercedes Benz, or they were driving a, kind of a beat up pickup truck. He was friends with everybody. And I don't know, I think I kind of took that skill set on myself because I saw him doing it. He would always kind of constantly engage me in conversation. He would say, "Hey, like Drew, there's Mr. So and so. There's this person." And, he would always engage me in conversation. So very early on, I found it very easy to talk to people. And so I don't know how that translates, in general, but, there are a lot of professions where you need to be outgoing, you need to be really good at communication and conversation and so on. But you know, that was you know, I learned that later on in life, and I really feel like if I would have, you know, studied that or thought about that, or maybe, you know, in you know, college, you know, there were kind of more assessments that younger people were taking to kind of match them with professions that you know, we would see people matched early on in their career.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I think you know, from what I've heard from you and, you know, the work that you're doing now, I really see that in you in terms of, you know, your own employees and at the companies that you've worked for and trying to, yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're really good with people and try in terms of trying to match them with the jobs and the skill sets that are really going to give them energy and not, you know, drain them. And so, I mean, I know we're going to talk more about that, but just in 2008, you and your partner cashed in your 401ks in your early 20s to start your own business. A big, how did that unfold? And what were some of the struggles that you two went through in starting that business?
So, you know, this is you know, this is the point that you kind of made earlier, that a lot of people kind of see everyone's highlight reel and they're like, oh, it must be great to do this and to do that, and you know, to kind of see where people are today, and they very rarely see the work that was put in, you know, years and years and years prior before that. They don't see the late nights, the early mornings, all of those things, and so. Yes, going back to you know, kind of setting the timeline here. I was 21 years old in 2005. That's the year I got married. That's also the year I started working for Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. So a lot happened that year, 2005, and then I worked for Anthem collectively for almost 2.5, going on 3 years.
Mm.
And a lot of the people that I had been working with, they said, "Hey, you know, Drew, you're doing so well, and you're having success here, and you know, and you really have a, you know, you've got a bright future." But if I were you, I would go and I would start my own company. You know, these are people that are in their 30s and 40s, and in some cases older, and they're saying, "Hey, if I knew what you knew, I would go start my own company." And at that time, I really didn't know, you know, what that meant or what that entailed, and I really didn't know that I had the ability to do that. And so I started talking to one of my close friends, a guy named Josh Mushlock. Josh grew up in Michigan, came to college in Kentucky, and then he had settled back in southern Indiana in the Evansville area. And we met. We were actually going to church together, and we were good friends and played golf on the weekends, and you know, just we became really good friends. So I was just having a conversation with him one day, and I said, "Hey, Josh, I'm thinking about quitting my job." And he said,
Mm.
"Oh, really? Like, why?" I was like, "Well, you know, I really like the work that I'm doing. You know, health insurance, Medicare at the time is really interesting. But I was like, all these people that I'm working with are telling me, hey, you know, if I were you, I would go start my own company." And so Josh looks at me and says, "Well, hey, I'm thinking about leaving my job too."
Wow.
And Josh was actually working for a large bank, and he said to me something that was pretty profound. He goes, "Hey, look, I'm doing well here. You know, Josh was 24 years old, about to be 25. He said, I'm doing well here, but I'm looking ahead at all the people that are ahead of me, and none of them are happy."
Mm.
And I'm looking ahead. I'm looking, quote, up the ladder. It's a corporate nod, right? I'm looking up the ladder. None of them are happy. They're working late. They're working on the weekends, you know, banking hours, Saturdays, and whatnot. And he said, none of them are happy. So tell me what you got. And I said,
Yeah.
well, okay. What do you think about starting a health insurance and Medicare agency? He said, absolutely not. I'm definitely not interested in doing insurance. And
Mm.
literally, that's exactly what happened. And so he said, I'm definitely not interested in doing that. Let's do something else. And, we kind of went on a journey over several months and ultimately ended up landing, on starting our own health insurance and Medicare firm because we saw a need for it. We saw that it was niche. We saw that there was, there was a gap in the market and people weren't really doing this. And we felt like it was worth a try. Worst that could happen is we go back working for somebody else, and here we are, almost 20 years later, and it's worked out quite well.
Yeah, I that's That's a great story. Walk me through some of the struggles, though, that you had early on in getting the business going and scaling it. And I mean, and what was your work life balance during that time?
So do we really have to get into the bad stuff, Diana? I'm just kidding. I know that this is what this is all about. I love, I love, the what you do and the people that you interview and the content you put out, because this is really what matters. And I don't know who's out there and who's listening to this, and where you are in life, but I'll just tell you this: when it gets hard, keep going. When you think you can't take another step, take a step. Find a friend, find a mentor, find somebody else that's been through it, because there were so many people that helped me to really keep going. And I was fortunate enough to have a really good business partner. But I'll also say this: we both had really good wives as well. So I'll say, they at 23 and 24 years old, both early on in our marriage and life and young, we cashed out our 401ks, which for me was like, at the time was like $20,000. And it was basically living expenses for, I don't know, 6 to 12 months roughly.
Yeah.
My wife was working as a medical biller. She's really actually much smarter than I am, but she was working as a medical biller, and she was had a full-time income. We didn't have any kids at the time, and then Josh's wife was actually a full-time middle school teacher, and she actually taught music and really cool. We started in March of 2008, which if you're listening to this and you realize kind of what happened in March of, or not necessarily March, but 2008 was not necessarily let's say, the most stable year in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But aside from, what was happening, like in the markets and the financial world and all of that, another thing was really interesting that was happening. That was the year that Barack Obama was actually running for nomination, and later that year in 2008, he would actually run for presidency. And the vote was actually in November. He actually was elected president in November of 2008, took office in January of 2009, and one of his largest initiatives was healthcare reform, the
Yeah.
Affordable Care Act. And so here we are, starting a business in 2008, cashing out our 401ks, and we have literally one of the largest pieces of federal legislation talking about healthcare, health insurance, Medicare, and we're faced with that. And so, you talk about kind of sleepless nights and worries and concerns. Really, back then, there weren't a lot of initial, like immediate changes when he took office, but certainly over like 2011, 12, we really started to see a lot of unsettling in the market. And there were a lot of insurance experts that really thought we were going kind of full, federal single payer system. We weren't going to, there wasn't going to be any jobs for any brokers or agents or anything like that. And, we might as well just all, pack up shop and do something else. And so in 2010, so 2 years into our business, we probably had 4 total team members. We were, I guess, forward thinking enough that we were like, hey, we're doing well in health insurance and Medicare, but let's start a home and auto division. And so we actually hired a friend of ours to come start a home and auto division, and started to diversify and really, really do something different than health and Medicare, because we were unsure about the future. But I go back to kind of 2008 and look at us cashing out our 401ks. Another thing we did, this is I don't know, maybe good or bad, or maybe you edit this out later, but another thing we were doing was we were actually utilizing the cash advances on credit cards. And then we were, borrowing $10,000 or $20,000 personally. And then we would wait until the end of that term, and then we would pay it off, because our company wasn't making money, right? We were in our first year. It was really, really difficult. And so, if you can, don't do that. But at the time, really, Diana, we had to do whatever we could, because there's one thing that's kind of unique about Josh and myself both. As far as our families are concerned, we are both first generation wealth creators. My granddad was a dairy farmer. My biological dad was a truck driver. Not an owner. He just was a driver. He didn't have a large income. My mom was single mom. I lived with her primarily, but spent a lot of time with my granddad. We weren't living high life. I always had everything I needed, and probably at the time most of the things that I wanted. But looking back, we weren't growing up, a wealthy family. So, Josh and I had to do whatever we could. We didn't have a nest egg to fall back on. We didn't have a family that was going to back us up if it didn't work. We just had to figure it out on our own. And those were some challenging times for sure.
Yeah, I mean, running a high growth startup, usually means working relentless hours, juggling global teams, and facing constant pressure from investors and competitors. Just some statistics. A 2024 survey of 156 founders revealed that more than half, 53%, suffered from burnout within the past year, according to Sifted. And a 2021 study from CB Insights found that 5% of startups fail because of burnout. Drew, your business did not fail. In fact, it was extremely successful. I know you scaled the business over those years, and in 2020, you had the successful exit and sold to EverQuote, a small publicly traded company. And I know you spent 3 years there, and that was kind of a different experience as well during those 3 years. And I think you went through a little bit of an identity crisis. And so tell me what happened there and how did you overcome that?
Sure. Very, very much so. That was a good recap. I think that going back as starting a company and starting your first company, and you like it becomes your life. And so I go back to like 2008. I'm 23 years old, turning 24. That later that year, I look at the work that we were doing. I look at kind of our mission and vision. Like, we never set out to sell the company. That was never our goal. We lived day to day, working to try to do something that was meaningful. Our company was helping people find health insurance, protecting them against, major illnesses, and helping them, afford the good things in life, like having a baby or retiring, or, whatever that might be. But that does not come with without a pretty heavy weight on your shoulders. I remember, Diana, very early on. This is before the exit. This is before really our company was having a lot of success. I remember walking out of the office and seeing all of the vehicles in the parking lot and thinking, you know what? Like, the decisions that I make today, are responsible for a lot of lives. And not only just the teams that we had, but like, think about, what those vehicles do. They go and they pick up kids, and they take kids from, school to, a babysitter, or maybe to a soccer game, or maybe to t-ball, or, dance lessons, or whatever it is. And like, the decisions that we make impact a lot of lives. And I carried that. I mean, I still carry it today, and try to really run everything through that, because, I think there are a lot of people that start a company and they think, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to do really well. I'm going to be rich, or whatever, people start out and do. But I would challenge you against that thought. I would challenge anybody that's thinking about starting a company. If you're doing a company right now, like, make sure that your company has a purpose, make sure that it solves a problem, and make sure that you understand the gravity of the decisions that you make, because they don't just impact yourself. They impact everybody that works at your company, all of your teammates, and their families, and the lives and people that they touch, and the things that they do, and maybe the, organizations and stuff that they volunteer for, and whatnot. So you've got to make sound decisions, because, one way, right or wrong, you're never going to be right 100% of the time, but you've got to be, you got to be willing to make decisions for everybody, versus just yourself. So I would challenge, anybody listening on that. And the transition from, a closely held private, company, and one other thing, Diana, I'll just mention, is that Josh and I were 50-50, equity shareholders of the company. We never had any investors. We never raised any outside capital. We were 50-50. So when you add like the statistics and you add, like, you look at the probability of success, when a company is a 50-50 company, the odds of it being successful and ending in success decrease
Mm,
significantly over just, startups in general. 50-50 companies generally don't work out.
mm,
And so we had a lot of times where we butted heads,
yeah.
and we had a lot of times where he wanted to go one way and I wanted to go a different way. And I think that, it took us many, many years to really determine, like, each other's skill set and strengths, and also studying, like, how the other person thinks, and then realizing that, hey, we're both pulling in the same direction.
Mm,
So I don't know if anybody out there, if you have trouble with your business partner or whatever, that's normal, because guess what? You're human and you're different people and you process things differently. And, sometimes he would say something, and it would be very abrupt and direct. And I would take offense to it, because I'm like, huh, well, that wasn't very nice. Like, or that wasn't, like, I would have said that differently. But the reality is, I would have said it differently because I'm a different person. I process things differently. We could talk about it later, but I'm really interested in the Enneagram. I've been working on the Enneagram, studying it the last, year or so. And it's really, really interesting. My business partner and I are definitely two different people. But one of the things that contributed to our success is we figured out how to work together and figured out how to make decisions together. And that ultimately led to kind of what you alluded to earlier in 2020, which was a successful exit for us in our first company.
yeah. And so I know that there's a lot of lessons learned here in your career. And I mean, one of the things that you were talking to me about is it's really important to, kind of merge your personal life and your professional life. And, a lot of people kind of just compartmentalize that and separate it. And so I guess I'm wondering, how have your experiences, shaped the work that you're doing now with Move Health, but also how are you bringing your personal life into the workplace?
Sure. It's great. Really great question. And, this is difficult for a lot of people, and it's difficult for a lot of personality sets. There certainly are a lot of people who really, really have trouble shutting things off. I know that was really difficult for Josh. He was constantly thinking about improvement and constantly thinking about efficiencies and constantly thinking about the next thing and the next year and the next 5 years. And I don't know, one of the things that I did better is I think I processed things quite different than he did. Oftentimes I was able to celebrate the moments where we were, the small victories. I was able to celebrate the milestones. Hey, we hit $100,000 a month in revenue. We hit $200,000 a month in revenue. We hit $1 million in a quarter. Like, all of these things, these milestones, that was the way that I was processing it. And it really kind of helped me to sort of stay in the moment. My business partner did not, Josh really didn't process it that way. And it actually ended up being a very beautiful match for us, because he was constantly pushing us to be better. He was constantly pushing us to grow, and constantly pushing us to really kind of pursue the next thing. And, oftentimes I would be satisfied in the moment. I've said many times that if it wasn't for Josh, that, I probably would still be a 2 or 3 person, insurance agency, just helping 4 or 5 people a day. But he challenged my mindset of saying, hey, like, you can only help 4 or 5 people a day, but what if you trained 10 agents to
Mm,
do it how you do it? And then we could help 40 to 50 people a day. And then what if you did that, 10 times over, and we built a company with 100 people, and all of a sudden we could help 400 to 500 people a day? And that challenge and that kind of mindset shift is kind of what led us to really grow and scale, and get to the point where we had a lot of companies that were looking to acquire us, and ultimately making the decision to sell in 2020. But I wouldn't have processed it that way myself without a really good partnership. So if you don't have a business partner out there, I encourage you to invest in coaching. I encourage you to invest in, leadership groups, or, there's various, types of organizations that are for business owners, that let you kind of come in and talk about the challenges and talk about what you're doing, and and really process things differently. Because if you don't have that sounding board like I did, it can be difficult if you're just kind of living in your own head, and that would be a challenge and a takeaway that I would give to anyone listening.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to bring this back to Move Health and the work that you're doing now, because I think it's really important for advisors to be aware of what the company does. And I think that, I mean, you can better explain it than I am, but I think that a lot of the work that you're doing now, is reflective of the experiences that you've had over the years, right? And the lessons learned through the businesses. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Like what was the inspiration for Move
Of
Health?
course, I would love to talk about it, because, it's kind of what we do. It's really sort of who I am. I think that, in order to really talk about the birth of Move Health and how we decided to build Move Health and what we're building at Move Health, I kind of have to go back to, pre-acquisition, and then kind of talk about what we were doing there, and then kind of talk about what happened after we sold. Because I think early on it was very clear to be like, hey, we're solving a problem, we're on mission, we're on point, we're doing this. And then, when you sell, obviously you lose control,
Mm.
right? You're not in control anymore. I became an employee. And, really, starting out, I felt kind of like, a middle manager, for lack of a better way to put it. I didn't have any authority. I didn't make, any decisions. Any idea that I had to be vetted and would take months and months, to kind of process. And so, kind of selling to a small cap publicly traded company was really, really eye opening. And although it was successful and, it was a major blessing for our family, and, I wouldn't change anything. There were a lot of things that I learned during that period of time that, really the immediate response post closing was, hey, we need to grow this company 10x. How do we grow this company 10x?
Mm.
And, while that's always a good thing, just, growth without regard for anything else has its challenges. We very quickly, I saw us kind of losing the mission and vision of what we were doing. And, rather than us like solving for, health insurance transitions and helping people to retire, and moving into their next phase of life, rather than us seeing that, it was about, the number of headcount that we could get and the number of calls that we could get and how much revenue we could drive. And it was all those things. And we kind of lost the true mission of what we had been doing. And so, after spending 3 years kind of in that small cap, publicly traded, position, and being in a spot where, it was kind of just, let's grow, no holds barred, let's just do whatever. I started to see kind of our vision, start to leak. I started to see really the purpose of what we were doing kind of fall to the side. And so long story short, we were able to make an exit in 2023 from our responsibilities there.
Mm.
And, we had the ability to start Move Health. And looking back over the past 2 decades, I've found time and time again that there were tens of thousands, millions of people that would love to retire and love to quit their job, but they didn't know how to do it. They would go to their financial advisor, and their financial advisor would say, hey, you have plenty of money. Your house is paid off. Your second house is paid off. The kids are in college. Like, life is good. All you have to do to make this change is go buy health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, generally. So we saw that, as a real opportunity, because we looked at financial advisors and planners and people that were in those positions as, really the key decision maker. To use a sports analogy, we call kind of the financial advisor the quarterback on the field.
Mm-hmm.
The ball is always touching the quarterback. We just had the NFL draft, over the weekend. The quarterback generally touches the ball every play. It's kind of like the financial advisor. Whatever you're doing, they're running, they're touching the ball. They're calling the play. They're telling people what to do, where they should line up, what routes to run if you're a receiver, where to hand off, all of these things. And then we kind of look at Move Health really like a special teams player, because we're not in the game all the time, right? People aren't talking about health insurance every day. We're not, we're not, really the star, that, gets paid the highest, salary to come and play for the team, but we're like that special teams player. When you're down to the end of the game and you're down 2 points and the quarterback drove the ball all the way down the field and you're sitting on the 10-yard line, there's 1 second on the clock, and you got to kick a field goal to win. Well, that's kind of like the analogy of a family or a person or whatever that has made it all the way to retirement. Say they're 58 or they're 61 or 62 or whatever age they are, and they're ready to quit their job, but they can't do it because of health insurance. Well, the problem we solve is we are a team of health insurance and Medicare experts that partners with financial advisors. We've developed the first of its kind, a software tool that a financial advisor can use to accurately predict the cost of health insurance and run an analysis for their clients that are in this window and predict the cost of health insurance for multiple years, and then work with Move Health to implement the health insurance and Medicare strategy so that their clients can retire confidently and move into their next phase of life. Pun intended, right? That's what we do. So thanks for the lead in on that. And it's been fun. We are almost 2 years in at the time of this recording, and not without challenges. Not everything's perfect, but we're growing, and we're bringing on more partners with financial advisor community every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important what you're doing. I think there's a constant pressure for advisors to differentiate themselves out there in the marketplace, to show clients the value that they're bringing, beyond investment planning and investment management, financial planning. So I think this is a really important gap in our marketplace that advisors can show their value to their clients. Well, I'm afraid we're just about out of time, Drew, but I'd like to thank my guest, Drew Shockley, for being on the podcast and sharing his story with me. Drew, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I love, again, like I said earlier, I love the work that you're doing. I think there's extreme value in really thinking about, all the aspects of, how we balance, work, and how we balance life, and how we get through hard things, and, all of the stuff that you're working on, is amazing. So keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. I think you've provided just some really great insights and takeaways for our audience. But if you'd like to reach out to Drew, if you have any questions for him, you can email him at drew@movehealth.io. And we'll put this in the show notes as well. But if you have a struggle and you wish to share your experiences and help others in similar situations, please feel free to reach out to me at diana.britton@informa.com. I'd like to thank you for listening to The Healthy Advisor. If you've not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This is Diana Britton reminding you that where there's healing, there is hope. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to The Healthy Advisor, a podcast focused on advisors' personal well-being and healing. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of WealthManagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice. Always seek the advice of your healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your particular situation.